speaking of powerful, we have a dynamic, fabulous panel coming up right now. And it starts with Shelly again, Shelly Tygielski. And Shelly is the founder of Pandemic of Love, a global grassroots mutual aid community that has connected over 2 million people with over $62 million in direct aid since the beginning of COVID-19. She's the author of the highly acclaimed book, Sit Down to Rise Up, How Radical Self-Care Can Change the World. And she teaches self-care and resilience practices around the world to vulnerable populations. Most recently, she was in Poland, on the border of Ukraine, doing the work, getting involved, working in this vein. Shelly and her beautiful panelists, she will be introducing her panelists. Bring them on out and hello, welcome.
Hey, thank you.
Oh.
Yeah.
Guys, mic me. The title is important. It's the intersection of mindfulness and activism, how women are showing up, staying present, and doing the work. Thank you. There we go.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Let's hear it for women in activism. The OG caretakers. All right, so let me introduce my esteemed panel, carefully hand-selected. Let me start with Emily McDowell. I gave her a shout out this morning if you were at my talk. Emily just recently came with me to Poland. She's an incredible, some would even say overly empathetic human being. She's a writer and illustrator and the founder and creative director of the stationery brand M & Friends. 100% you've seen her stuff in every Barnes & Noble and in every bookstore and every tchotchke store that you'll go to. There's another Yiddish word for you. Look it up. She is also the co-author and illustrator of the book, There Is No Good Card for This: What to Say and Do When Life Gets Scary, Awful, and Unfair to People You Love. And I also want to give a shout out. She has a new podcast with New York Times bestselling author Holly Whitaker, who wrote Quit Like a Woman, and it's called Quitted. And it's great. You guys should totally listen to it. So welcome, Emily. Dr. Sara King, you all had an opportunity to get familiar with Sara's work yesterday. And if you didn't, you should go back and watch it. Dr. Sara King is a neuroscientist, a philosopher, a social entrepreneur. She is a game changer and the founder of Mind Heart Consulting, a firm that offers the science of social justice framework and the systems-based awareness map, which he presented to us yesterday. She and I know each other for many years. We're both Garrison Institute fellows together, and she's just a fabulous and wonderful friend and human being. And then last but not least, Elsa Collins is the co-founder of Poderistas, and This Is About Humanity, the founder of The Ideator, and is a founding member of I Am a Voter. A lot of founding there. Every aspect of her work is centered and focused on service to others and justice. This Is About Humanity is an organization raising awareness and funds for separated and reunified families at the US-Mexico border. Poderistas is a digital community created to inspire Latina influencers to use their platforms to encourage civic participation in the electoral process. So thank you all for your amazing work in the world and for being here today. And so what I alluded to earlier was that the bringing these women together was definitely not just like a, hey, randomly, let me look through my phone book and see like who I can come up with, right? I think it's really interesting that you're looking at 4 very diverse women that are sitting up here that are all expressing or interpreting the meaning of activism and how we show up in the world very differently, using different tools. So Emily is doing so with her words and creatively through her art, and she's an amazing artist. And Sara is doing this, as a scientist and like researching and being able to like ask really important, critical, fundamental questions. And Elsa is an attorney, but she's also somebody who's like getting out there every day and is on the front lines, literally doing this work. And so we're all, out there in different ways. And so what I wanted to do is start with just the basics. I'm going to start with the definition of activism. What is it? to you? What qualifies as activism and what makes you one? And then just talk a little bit more about your work to give it more color. Whoever wants to start first.
I can go first.
Yeah.
I think for me, activism is different for everybody. So especially in the work that I do, a lot of times people feel like, well, I can't go to the border. I don't live close to something that's happening. And what are the things that I can do? And I think that everybody can be an activist in real life in your own way. You know, just by showing up, by reading, by educating yourself, by looking for people in your own community that perhaps are having an experience that you feel close to. So I think for me, it's finding those issues or that issue that really moves you, and then figuring out what are your skills, what's in your toolbox that then you can sort of go out there and do yourself. And it's gonna look different for everybody.
Yeah. And talk a little bit more about your organizations.
Yeah, so this is about humanity. We work with separated and reunified families at the border. I was just there last week. And we're really trying to bring people closer to the issue. You know, sometimes you wake up and there's so much that's happening in this world that it just feels like, what can I even do? Because the list is so long of all the injustices and things that might seem overwhelming. So this is personal to me. I'm from the border. And so what I could do was bring people closer to have an understanding of, like, who are these people? Who are these families? Who are these children? What are we doing? And what are gonna be the consequences of our actions? And having people feel like they can talk about it and it's not so scary anymore. And it's a topic that can come up in conversation, that you can bring up with your family or your children. And so to me, that has been so valuable, because a lot of times we sort of look at, like, you know, who's the most, famous person that can talk about an issue. But the truth is, like, you're the most important people to the people in your own network. So what you say and what you validate and what you, like, propose is gonna be way more important than someone that, like, someone doesn't even feel connected to or even know. So just encouraging everybody to, be that most important person.
Awesome.
Yeah.
Love it.
Yeah, I really love what you're saying about this emphasis on community and connection. And in my work, I'm really passionate about creating safe and brave spaces for people to gather together. And to talk about a really central question in my work is, where does it hurt? Where does it hurt? Because oftentimes we are living in cultural contexts which encourage us to be quiet about where it hurts, to keep it to ourselves. There's a lot of stigma, there's a lot of shame, especially when it comes to talking about trauma, cultural trauma, intergenerational trauma. And so for me, a huge component to activism is this question of what are the kinds of spaces where we can gather together and share with this kind of honesty and directness, but also be embodied, so that we're not just talking about our trauma from the head, but we're talking about it from the heart, we're talking about it from the gut, we're moving through it. You know, we have somatic healing practices that can really hold that container with integrity. Because one of the things that I've noticed in social justice spaces is that we are holding so much intergenerational trauma and wounding that sometimes the ways that we are in relationship with one another can be very divisive. It can come from a form of internalized violence. And so we really have to work with that inside of ourselves if we can show up with one another and actually show one another loving kindness and compassion.
Beautiful.
I love that. Yeah, this question of where does it hurt is also has been really central to the work that I do, which sounds maybe a little bit strange because I own a greeting card company. And, but I had cancer when I was 24. And a get well soon card is really strange if you might not. Because you're like, cool, I'll try, like, thanks, And the thing that really struck me about that experience, it was incredibly lonely, and it was not lonely for the reasons that I thought it would be. It was lonely because people shied away because they didn't know what to say. And at the time, I was so young, I had never known anyone who had been sick. I interpreted that as, this must be me, right? Like if I was more lovable, if I was different, people wouldn't do this. And then as I got older, I learned like, no, this was never about you. This is our culture. We don't learn how to talk about hard things. We get afraid to reach out when someone is sick or when someone is grieving because we're like, what if I say the wrong thing? What if I make it worse? And so my brand is known for what we called empathy cards, which are our answer to traditional sympathy cards, and that actually were designed to help people who don't know what to say reach out. And so with the desired result of having the person who receives a card feel seen and heard, and to help the person giving a card feel like they're actually doing something, like they know what to do instead of just saying, seeing a blank space that says with sympathy. And so it's really this, it's a helping to facilitate a conversation when at that time in your life when you really most need to feel a connection with the people who love you.
Amazing.
Can you imagine if that happened in our government, if people were like sharing empathy cards, across the divide instead of like yelling at each other? That'd be amazing.
Yeah. Imagine that.
Yeah.
Well, let's create a small shift here, and we talked about this a little bit earlier backstage. One of the things that always has bothered me about being like a responsible, reliable type A personality, which I would say like all of us are on the stage, is the fact that as an activist, and you see this in spaces of activism, whether you're a volunteer or a staff worker for a nonprofit or, however it manifests, the reward for being, a hard worker and for showing up and for doing good work is often more work. And that's exhausting.
Yeah.
Activism fatigue and activism burnout is a very real thing. And so I know like in the mindfulness space right now, there's, compassion-based resilience training. And we talk a lot about, Brene Brown talks about the difference between empathy and sympathy. And we talk about just, vulnerability fatigue and on and on and on. And so I want to talk a little bit more about, what self-care looks like for you as an activist when you can identify that it's too much and that you need to reel back, and what maybe tools we can offer to, or suggestions or best practices, or even pose questions to the audience at this point, right? About how we can tend to ourselves, put the oxygen mask on first on ourselves, and remember to do that so that we can continue to help people.
Yeah, I think what you were saying about community is so true because, that saying like, don't grow weary in well-doing, I think it's when you have a community around you that can sort of share in that so that you don't feel so isolated. And I think that's one of the things that we try to do, that I try to do in any organization that I'm a part of, is really create that community so that we can have that shared experience. Personally, myself, I 100% ascribe to, going for a run is my version of a glass of wine. So for me, self-care looks like taking some time to get some exercise, get some endorphins. And it sounds crazy, but I tell people, for me, doing that workout has to be maybe the most important thing that I do in a day, because if I don't give it that importance, I won't do it. I will actually, because it's not the most important thing. So I have to treat it like it is so that I make the time to do it. And then I feel like I can go to the border, I can, go get people out to vote, I can pick up my kids, I can do whatever comes next. Like, I've already checked off like Elsa's good, and I can totally handle the rest of the day. But I think it's also again, it's not working out for everybody. Maybe it is a glass of wine, maybe it's a walk in nature, maybe it's putting your devices away, whatever it might be. But recognizing it and then giving yourself permission to do it, because as you said, you're like, if you're go, and it's like, you end up in this vicious cycle, and you sort of have to say like, no, like, I'm gonna do it, it's gonna be okay, and like, not to self-criticize when you do that.
Yeah.
I'm going to give maybe a little bit of alternative sounding advice in this moment, but I remember that Shelly and I were gathering together in the Garrison Fellowship with our mentor, Dr. Dan Siegel. And I really had a breakdown in front of the group, which, is something that is allowed amongst ourselves. It's a part of our healing process, is that we can show up as professionals, and we can be vulnerable and we can be messy, and there's something incredible about that. And I remember I said something like, I don't know if I have the capacity to show up and be with what is in this moment, in this world. I don't know if I have what it takes. And I remember what he said to me was, it was something along the lines of, it's Dan Siegel, so it was probably way more eloquent than what I'm about to say. But what I got from it was, well, of course you don't have the capacity to show up yourself. It's actually not about you, the individual. It's not about what you, Sara, right, with like a God complex, has to do to like fix and help and save everything. And he was like, where are you at in your inner practice? How are you tuning into source? Because it's not about getting the power and the energy and the drive from like you, the individual. It's how you're turning within to that which is greater than you and being in relationship with that force and that energy, and that is where you are going to source. That is where you are going to become resourced, fed, and nourished. And as long as you are thinking about yourself as this like isolated, lone individual, I'm so small, I'm so tiny, and basically going into like pity party mode, then you are going to be frozen and you will not have what it takes to meet with the moment. And so that is a part of my self-care practice, is constantly, how am I returning to source and remembering that it's actually not about me?
That's
Beautiful.
great. That's great.
Love that.
I think for me, I will be honest, I worked so hard from 2012 until 2017 that I reached a place of such deep burnout that for me, all of the joy was gone from what I did. And I realized that people would tell me these incredibly impactful, beautiful things, and I couldn't even hear it. Like, I couldn't even take it in. Oh, this thing you wrote changed me, or this beautiful thing. And it would just be like, thanks. Like, it was this flat affect that I now know as deep burnout that I didn't know then. And so I made some really big changes in my business where I actually sold the majority of the company and ended up really able to focus on what I do best, and then also having a team. So spreading out, taking it from just me and just my words and just my art, and spreading it across many, many voices and many people, which ultimately also makes our message that much stronger and our work that much stronger. And then in that process for me, over these last few years, I really had to learn how to reparent myself and how to, instead of where I was going, where I kept coming up against myself was therapy. Because I grew up, like a lot of us, having a lot of therapy, and therapy is really wonderful. And I came to the understanding that my mind was actually not really helping me get at what was really in here. And so I could have therapy all day long, and I could know intellectually what was going on and where I was a mess, and that it wasn't helping me be less of a mess. And so turning to things like somatic work, breath work, meditation, these practices that are really important to me and that keep me sort of grounded and sane. And being out in nature is really basic, but it's super important for me.
Yeah. And you took time off too.
I did.
Which was super, like after 12 years of not doing that, you were like, I'm out.
Yeah.
And you went
I
to
took
Bali.
time. Yeah, so it was interesting because I didn't quite take it off. I mean, I was still working actually.
Yeah.
From there, I went to Bali for 6 months by myself.
Ooh.
And all I did was my job and work on me and work through the feelings of selfishness that I had around doing that and around having the ability to do that. But yes, it was the first time I had taken off, and the first time that I had prioritized anything except the company, or this is what I'm making, or this is the work that I'm doing.
Right.
And that was, yeah.
Yeah. And to invoke Audre Lorde in this moment, the great Audre Lorde, she wrote, "Self-care is not an act of indulgence. Self-care is an act of political resistance." So self-care is an act of resistance, right? We need to have that tattooed on our brains, basically. We need to remember that actually tending to ourselves, that inner work, it always starts with the inner. It has to start with the inner, or we have nothing to give to people. So yesterday, Paul Hawkins was on the stage. He's so amazing. And I was so enthralled with his presentation and his raven dance that he did up here. By the way, we saw the raven, just as a side note, outside of the window in that room. It's very cool. It had to be the same raven because it had the same dance moves. He said, "Our beliefs don't change our actions change our beliefs." And I wrote that down. I was like, yes, okay, gotta write that down. So talk to me about what may seem counterintuitive, right? Because the panel is, we're looking at the intersection of mindfulness and activism. And so, we're a group of people who sit and who, do the inner work, and we have these contemplative practices, whatever they look like. And I've always, and this is something that I speak to a lot and that I write about a lot, is the stalling of actually showing up and doing the action, because I really feel like, well, wait a minute. The action can really also inform the shift that happens within you. And so I wonder if there's a moment where, you were volunteering, or you saw something, or what was the impetus, from an action perspective that actually informed your heart, informed your mind, maybe changed the way that you look at, or look at not just activism, but really that reshaped who you are. Deep thoughts.
I'm just gonna let someone else go first.
I think I'll say that as a scientist, sometimes I feel like it's very taboo for me to talk about my personal life. I remember sitting when I was defending my dissertation, and I started out that dissertation defense by wanting to tell a story about my brother, my older brother Yeshaya, who was incarcerated for the vast majority of my life. And some of my earliest memories are of waking up in the middle of the night and hearing him literally being forcibly dragged down the stairs of our house by a squad of 5 police members who proceeded to beat him senseless in front of our door, because they accused him of trying to rob a man for $20, $40 at an ATM, and he just so happened to look like the fit. And I remember with my hands pressed up against the window, screaming, crying, what am I supposed to do as a 6-year-old? I was so small and helpless. And that's just one story. And I remember I started to tell that story, and everybody in that room looked at me and put up a finger, and they said, "Bup, bup, 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 bup. We're here to listen to the data, not you. We didn't come here to listen to your story." And I cannot tell you what a spiral of shame that I descended into in that moment, because the reason why I wanted to start out with that story was I wanted to relate to them from my heart. Here's why I care. Here's why I care to study youth of color who are, involved in yoga and meditation interventions, because they are traumatized in the same way that I am traumatized by my experience of the prison industrial complex, of racialized trauma, and I was silenced. And so I could have taken that shame and just like ridden that shame wave and like pretended like, no, I'm just a scientist. I'm just about the empiricism. I'm just about the data. And I'm trying to break out of that on this stage right here, right now, today. And just like model that courage. And what I realized was that I was trying to take refuge in the safety of being on my computer with the data and like telling other people's stories and trying to fit into this box. And then one day I remember I, was talking with a friend and they were like, why don't you do public speaking? Why aren't you talking about your experience? Like get out there with your story, like get out from behind that computer screen. And I was gonna cuss. It terrified me, it effing terrified me. But here I am, like completely out of my comfort zone in a certain sense. And the reason why I'm doing it is because I just have this like really deep and powerful abiding love inside of me for everyone who I share this earth with. And so it is worth it for me to like step outside of my comfort zone and be vulnerable. So that's what I'll
keep
say.
doing it, sister. Yeah. Amazing.
Will you remind me of exactly what the question was?
What on the journey?
I'm going
A
through the
seminal
menopause
moment.
transition.
Yeah.
If anyone can relate, and my
So, yeah.
brain is just not. Yeah.
Well, let's shift the conversation to talk about perimenopause. No. I mean, why not? We're here.
Just work it in.
Yeah, totally. Like if there was a seminal moment,
yes.
I imagine that obviously having cancer was one of them.
Except
but I think,
no.
yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
So I had cancer when I was 24, 20 years ago. And I went through a year of chemo and radiation and came out the other side. And my immediate thought was, I want to put this behind me. I don't want to make my identity about this. And also, how can I get health insurance? And as a creative person, my answer to that was to go into advertising. So I'm probably the only person alive to have survived cancer and then go into advertising. But I worked in that business for almost 10 years. And what got me out of it, and I was miserable for 7 of those 10 years. And I convinced myself to stick with it because of the sunk cost fallacy, which is, I have put so much time into this.
Yeah.
When this changes, if this will be better, XYZ, it wasn't, because it was the wrong path for me. And when I was 34, my college roommate got cancer and died 3 months later. And this was actually the impetus for me to leave the business and to start this company. This was the impetus for me to understand that people shying away was not about me. It was about the culture. And watching her go through this and being on the other side, and seeing people who I knew loved her be unable to connect with her was a huge watershed moment for me. And so the last conversation she had with me before she died, she said, what the hell are you doing? Like, stop doing this job. You're supposed to do something else. And that was really the impetus. I quit my job and freelanced for a minute, not knowing what I was going to do, and then had this idea. And I did not know anything about business. I will say, I'd worked in advertising. I had $15,000 in the bank, and I spent 7 of it printing 15,000 greeting cards. So I think that one of the things that I say to people often is, especially, in this room, we're sitting here in Silicon Valley, there is a lot of venture capital, there is a lot of these big dollars being thrown around. And this idea that if you have an idea for a company, that the way to do it is to go out and get funded. And that's not the only way to do it, and we didn't do it that way.
Woo!
And there's not right or wrong, but there's 2 different paths. And so you don't need to know all of I learned on the fly, and I made a ton of mistakes, and that's what being an entrepreneur is about. And, so yes, we're still here. And a card is piece of paper that's folded in half. Like, it's ancient technology. It's not like you have to have this idea for a fancy app or something that doesn't exist yet. It's solving a problem.
Yeah.
And we were in the right place at the right time to solve a problem.
Yeah, beautiful.
Yeah.
That's great. Wow, what a gift your friend gave you.
I know.
Like, literally, what a
Yeah.
parting gift.
Yeah.
Amazing.
Yeah.
Thank you for sharing that story. And thank you for sharing your stories. So we have 1 more minute left. And I just wonder if you, I guess in that 1 minute, if we could just quickly maybe share, you know, like like a mantra or something that is just brief that informs your work that you'd like to leave with the audience. Is there a quote? I'll share
know.
mine. Okay,
I'll share
go ahead.
mine. Stay open. That's mine.
Yeah,
Stay open.
love it. That's great.
I think for me, it's always going to go back to, like, you are important. You know, you are, like, if you're a parent, you're the most important person to your kids. If you're a child, you're the most important person to your parents, to your friends. I mean, that can apply to anything. And so knowing that everyone in this room has that power to really use it and to use it for the things that matter the most to you, I think.
I think I already said this in my presentation earlier, but if you have a body, then you deserve well-being. Period.
Yeah, I love that. That's so great. And I'll leave you with mine, which is even Superman is Clark Kent most of the time. Remember that. So thank you for being here. Thank you for your work in the world, for inspiring me to show up every single day. I love you all. And remember, women will save this world.